Hello and welcome to this week's Rights in Russia interview. I'm Mary Page, and today our guest is Pavel Chikov, a Russian lawyer who heads the Agora International Human Rights Group. A graduate of Kazan State University with a degree in international law, he also has a master's degree in public administration from the University of North Dakota in the US and a PhD in law from the Academy of Sciences of the Republic of Tatarstan. In 2001, he was the first director of Kazan Human Rights Centre in Tatarstan. In 2005, he founded the Agora Human Rights Organization, which became the Agora International Human Rights Group that he now leads. Pavel was a member of the Presidential Council on Civil Society and Development and Human Rights from 2012 to 2019, and in 2014, he and the Agora Human Rights Group were awarded the prestigious International Human Rights Award in memory of Professor Torolph Rafto of Norway. Thank you for joining us, Pavel. I'm happy to see you again and have the opportunity to spend a few minutes hearing your thoughts about the situation for human rights defenders today in Russia. I have some questions to guide our half-hour conversation, so if you're ready, let's get started. First question.
I'm ready, yes.
Excellent. Why did you decide to become a lawyer, and specifically a human rights lawyer?
Well, I would like to lie that it was something that I was dreaming about since I was a kid. But frankly saying, in the mid-90s, to go to the law school was very prestigious, and I came from a family of academicians. So my father is a professor of biology. In that time, the early 90s, it was a hard time for the people from science in Russia. We were poor, no money, no basic needs, etc. So I was dreaming to get rid of this life and find something better. So that's why I decided to go to the law school. I was studying good at my high school, and that's why I had a chance to to have a choice. So that's why I went there, and that's why I decided to become a lawyer. So being a lawyer allowed that time, or gave more opportunity to find yourself and in the life. Why I decided to be human rights lawyers? It was by chance, because I was being a student. I was trying to find a job, and it was even harder than to become a student in law school. And as long as I was at the international law and I spoke English, I had an opportunity to enter a human rights organization. So they were looking for a lawyer with some English language background, etc. Yes, so and I became a lawyer at the human rights organization, just a regular lawyer, giving consultations for people coming, etc. So and then I just knew how a human rights organization operates, and I decided to make my own. That was the first steps in my human rights life.
Mm-hmm. Excellent, thank you. These days in the West, our media paints a pretty gloomy picture of human rights on the ground in Russia. Is this accurate?
This is actually a complicated question because there is what I usually witness and see myself is that the situation in Russia, as well as in many other authoritarian countries, is being presented by the Western media like description a life from a certain exotic country, you know. So look, there are so dark places still in the world, and you can see this and that, and you know that might be, you know, South Asian countries, or African, or Belarus, or Russia, or Azerbaijan, or Turkey. Look what is Turkish government doing to the opposition, etc., etc. But it's being presented like a, you know, Hollywood story, like very, you know, fancy, and like something like, you know, a blockbuster thing, but not the real life, because we live here in a real life situation, and sometimes the real life situation is even worse than how it is described in the Western media. But sometimes, but it's still our, you know, it's still our conditions and our daily life here, and it can be. It should, I think, it might be presented different, like this is the reality that can be the same in almost any Western country. Look what is going on in Hungary, sometimes in Czech Republic, in Poland. Let's look what is going on in Bulgaria. Turkey was one step before entering European Union for many years, and look what is going on now there. 10 years ago, Russia and the EU were negotiating about non-visa regime, and look when we ended up right now. And etc. So it is closer than any reader of any you know US newspaper can even imagine. And look what you guys witnessed in your country during Trump, etc., etc. I mean, this is something behind the corner.
Exactly.
Around the corner, yes. So, so this is something around the corner, and this is definitely not how Western media presents the situation in Russia. So that was my point.
Yes, exactly. So to what extent can human rights organizations such as yours still function and be effective?
To a lower extent than it used to be, unfortunately, because we are losing our influence both on the government policies and public opinion, and unfortunately, and this is kind of a paradox, because we are increasing our capacities and experience and understanding what is going on, because we are becoming older, and we've been through a lot of difficulties, and we definitely can be more effective than we were when we just started working. But at the same time, we are facing these obstacles and restrictions around us by the government and the authorities, and this is, you know, the main trouble for our activities and development. So now we have to be cautious about what we are speaking loud in the to the public. Now we have to be you know, there are these red lines that we probably should not cross, or we understand the risks when we cross, etc., etc. So now the challenges are different than they used to be for 5, 10, or 15 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Well, what are some of the risks that human rights defenders are facing?
Criminal charges, searches in the apartment, arrest, term in prison, or exile, or I mean, I would say that nowadays Russia creates much more risks for any civic activity than, I don't know, since Soviet Union for sure, or probably even since 1970s, because in 1980s there were just, individual cases, not the systemic pressure from the government that we are witnessing right now.
So for human rights advocates that take these risks, are there sources of emotional or psychological support for them?
You mean outside?
Outside? Oh, yes, inside. Are there places that help them meet these risks, kind of on an emotional, psychological level? You say it's dangerous work, so where is the help coming from?
Well, first of all, it's a personal decision to continue, because if you continue, you take certain risks. You understand that something may happen. If you do not take these risks, you cannot continue working. I mean, this is a condition. Second is family. Of course, family supports, and if family supports, life is better, and these obstacles are easier to overcome. The third level, I would say, it's a corporate or team level, because we pay attention on that. We are watching on our team members. We try to organize some activities outside work or some meetings, because we are, currently we are a network of lawyers around the country, and there is a team. Well, in general, we have more than 200 lawyers, but the close team is about 30, and it is spread around the country. So we meet rarely, and we try to organize such meetings every year or twice a year, to see each other, to support, to talk, to share, etc., etc. And this, I would say, the main things. There are some services and organizations that provide shelters and these types of help, and few times we used them. We moved ourselves a couple of times. We moved several of our lawyers abroad for a couple of weeks. They were not in the emergency, but they definitely needed some psychological support and some rest. So that was helpful also. But I think that's it. That's the main things.
What has been the role of Western funders in Russia?
I mean, in the past?
Yes.
It's a good question, and a good explanation, a good illustration would be the comparison Russia and Belarus. Because in Belarus, it was very short time, just few years in the mid-90s, when the Belarusian civil society was developing. So it was very short time until the political regime became repressive more and more, and the civil society didn't have a chance to get developed, to be sustainable, to be flexible, to be professional enough to face such challenges. Unlike Russia, where we've had still about 15 years of active, more or less free and independent development until the government paid attention on what's going on in the civil society and tried to first reorganize, control, and then press on us. So in these 15 years, from early 90s till 2005, 6, but even then, for more than a decade, because Agora was developing exactly from 2005 till now. So our first 10 years were the most important for us. So now we, and not only we, but many major human rights organizations are professional enough and sustainable enough to face these challenges, even if they are going to be, I don't know, getting worse for coming years. So this is the difference between these neighboring countries, and definitely Russian story is better because of wide support from the donors, from the Western donors, from European and the United States, from 90s and I don't know, millennial, first decade, first 15 years, and even now, those who still get some foreign funds despite all these restrictions and risks. It is a very vital support sometimes, very important. It allows us to survive and even to develop.
So how much local support, not financial kind of, as well as sort of social support, do human rights organizations have?
It is very different depending on the type of activity, because it was very surprising how supportive Russian public is to the lawyers working in the protest activities. So over the Info and our project Apologia of Protest, they live mostly on crowdfunding, so they do not get foreign funds, and there are few media that live on basically on crowdfunding, like Media Zona, for example. So Russians happen to be generous enough, because the thing that I wouldn't even believe in just 5 years ago, that this is possible, but the reality is that Russians are willing to give money to opposition projects, to legal aid, to very sensitive and very sometimes risky, and Navalny team and his foundation against corruption was developing only basing on the Russian crowdfunding money. So this is one type. But at the same time, it is much harder to raise money for topics like police tortures or some penitentiary abuses or military service or something like that. So it is harder, much harder. So it depends on the topic, and this is when if we talk about money. In general, currently, the public in Russia is exhausted with the negative information and with all these governmental pressure, etc., etc. So when during the periods of raising of public awareness of what's going on in Russia, the support was very wide and through various types, like people were thanking Communians and willing to be volunteers, etc., etc. So now the times have different a little bit, but we'll see how this go further.
So much of the work that you do is through the courts, and I'm wondering, how do you see the courts? How independent do you see the courts that you work in?
Well, independence of the courts is something that is not applicable to Russia, and actually was not ever applicable to Russia since I don't know when. I wouldn't say that the courts were more independent in the 90s. They were just independent from some commercial interests and some some criminal organized crime, something like that. Now we're almost not talking about judicial independence in Russia at all. Especially when we talk about human rights abuses, when we are representing victims of violence from the police. That's always very sensitive cases to the government, and the authorities are trying to defend policemen, and in the criminal cases against political opposition leaders and activists, the situation is even worse because judges actually have no window of opportunities and any independence in decision making. So for the lawyers, you may ask then what guys you are doing in these cases and what can you reach there. But what we try to do is to diminish the harm, to challenge the possible punishment, struggling for the number of years of imprisonment. Sometimes we still are able to terminate the case, or we're able not to open it. So we try to fix it at the very beginning. So this is our main, and I think to a certain extent this is something similar in many countries, not only in Russia. But well, in general, we are not talking about judiciary independent in Russia, unfortunately. And who knows when this will change.
Mm-hmm. So what about the European Court of Human Rights? I mean, what role does it have?
It's getting worse, unfortunately. It's getting worse. And it's and also unfortunately that this is inevitably because the number of cases is growing all the time. the European Court of Human Rights was created as an instrument of the Convention of the Council of Europe, under which every member state signed and ratified and agreed to implement. So the thing is that the instrument can be effective. An instrument like European Court of Human Rights can be effective only basing on the political will from the member states to implement it. It cannot confront, it cannot fight with the member states if they are not willing to implement the obligations they voluntarily taken many years ago. So that's the main obstacle of the European Court of Human Rights. It has not, the squad of marshals that can enforce member states to implement the judgments. It can only generate or analyze and generate some standards, and then it is the obligation of the member states to follow those standards. If they are not willing to do that, there are no any leverage to force them to do that. So and as long as now we have Russia, Turkey, Azerbaijan, sometimes Ukraine, and these are the main abusers of the convention from the side of the European Court of Human Rights. They are challenging the whole system of the Council of Europe. While Ukraine is a little bit different, at least it still declares that it shares the human rights values. But talking about other three countries, at least, the governments are not even declaring that they share the values, the human rights and civil liberties. So that's the main problem. It's not about the court itself. It is the last chance we can apply to. So we are exhausting national remedies. Then we go to the European Court of Human Rights because there is no other way to go, nowhere to go, and we receive these judgments, we receive these payments, the compensation paid by the government regularly, but not much changed. Sometimes the government is changing, and which is good. And I'm not in the position of a total critics to the Russian government in terms of the European Court of Human Rights. Something is getting better. But not in the most sensitive issues like freedom of assembly, freedom of association, freedom of expression. So these freedoms are under attack and pressure, and not changing much in nowadays Russia, even despite the European Court of Human Rights.
So our last question. What does the future look like for human rights in Russia?
Well, we'll be struggling for survival during coming years, for sure. We have to be prepared that things are getting worse. The repressive mechanism is so big that it needs someone to struggle with. And although we're not political opposition, after the political opposition is destroyed, they will inevitably come after lawyers, human rights activists, environmental activists, independent journalists, and they are almost here. So this is the coming future is dark and challenging, but still in the long run, I think that things will be better. So we'll see how these go and how long will it take to get better.
Thank you so much, Pavel. I wish we had not come to the end of our half hour, but we have. And so I'd like to thank you for your analysis, particularly your comparison of Russia and Belarus, very, very interesting. It's just been such a pleasure to talk with you again, and we wish you the best of luck in the future, and sincere wishes for continued impact in your work.
Thank you very much, Mary. It was very nice to see you again.